Chapter 13, The Hero. Gus couldn't remember what had happened to him after that. All he knew was when he woke up, he could hear Addie gently talking to him. He had a cool cloth lying across his forehead, and his hands were tightly covered with bandages. Gus! Gus! Open your eyes, son! Open your eyes! Everything's all right now. Gus opened his eyes. There, standing before him, was not Addie, but his mother. Trying to sit up, Gus felt dizzy and eased himself back onto the bed. He blinked. The lights seemed so bright. Where am I? He asked weakly. Opening his eyes again, he could see that he was in the hospital. There, standing beside him, was his mother, was Tommy. Tommy, how'd I get back? Questioned Gus. Hey, kiddo, how you feeling? I don't suppose you know this, but you're a real hero at White Pine School, said Mr. Christie, who was dressed in a plaid shirt. A curl was out of his bushy mustache. You know, Gus, if you hadn't gotten out of that bathroom and pulled the fire alarm when you did, I hate to think of what would have happened. As it was a real mess. Tommy, how'd I get back? Asked Gus. Oh, Gus, you must have breathed in too much smoke from that awful fire, said his mother. You poor thing, are you all right? Gus began to remember. He remembered Alex, or Al, in the bathroom, and later in the paper towels. The lumberjack camp must have all been a dream, a crazy dream. Gus looked down at his bandages. This couldn't have happened with the black lead, could it? He wondered. The wastebasket. Gus, don't you remember? It was red hot from the fire, and you burned your hands on the wastepaper basket trying to move it away from the paper towel holder, said his mother. What about Alex? What happened to Alex? Questioned Gus. You mean Al? Said Mr. Christie. You don't need to worry about Al anymore. After he started the fire, he ran down the hall towards the front entrance of the school. He tripped on the steps going out and sprained his ankle pretty badly. He was so scared he admitted that he had the lighter and started the fire. Gus, Al even told Mr. Christie that why you were always fighting. I understand now why you didn't want to tell me. You didn't want to hurt my feelings, said his mother. Gus felt good to hear his mother say she understood. Al is down in the emergency room getting his ankle bandaged, Gus, said Mr. Christie. I don't think he's going to be bothering you anymore. Just then there was a tap at the door, and it was Mr. Knowles, the big push, and he was pushing Al in a wheelchair. His ankle was all bandaged and sticking out in front of him. In his laps were a large paper sack. Mr. Knowles shoved the door open and wheeled Al in. But before he could get all the way in, though, the door swung back and bumped Al's bandaged foot. Ouch! He yelled in pain. Gus, said Knowles, ignoring Al. This young man has something to say to you. Don't you, Al? The door opened again, and there stood Al's parents. Alan, don't you have something to say to Gus? They urged. Al hung his head. When he looked up, Gus could see that Al had been crying. I'm sorry, Gus, Al said without really looking at him. I'm sorry for everything. Al's parents, standing there in the back of the room, spoke up. Mrs. McCarty, we are sorry for what happened to your son because of Alan. We want you to know that Gus will never be bothered again by Alan again. Isn't that right, Alan? And as far as hospital bills go, we insist on paying them. Annie McCarty nodded her head. Thank you. I appreciate that. Alan, said Mr. Knowles, don't you have something to give Gus? Yes, sir. Al handed Gus a paper bag that sat on his lap. This gift is from Alan and myself, said Mr. Knowles, for putting the fire alarm and saving the school. I hope you like it, Gus. There wasn't much selection down in the gift shop. Alan somehow thought you would like this. Gus's mother helped Gus remove the gift from the bag. It was almost the perfect gift Gus could ever wanted. Napoleon, cried Gus. It's Napoleon, Al. How'd you know? Gus took a carved bear out of the bag and patted his head with bandaged hands. Pleased by his reaction, Mr. Knowles smiled. Well, I suppose we should be going and let Gus get his rest so he can get back to school. Al's parents agreed as they pushed the wheelchair from the room, and Mr. Knowles following. Gus examined the wooden bear. It was like seeing his old friend Napoleon again. Dreams are really weird, thought Gus. You know, Annie, Mrs. McCarty, said Mr. Christie, I don't want you to worry about Gus getting behind in school. I'll stop by with his work and so we can keep up with his classmates. But, Mr. Christie, I couldn't ask you to do that. You're a busy man, said Annie McCarty. There's no one waiting for me at home, he said. It's my pleasure to help, Gus, said Mr. Christie with a twinkle in his eye. Oh, by the way, Gus, Al is suspended from school for a week, and it looks like he will have to go to summer school because he has skipped so many classes. I kind of thought you'd like to know. Maybe when we start feeling better, you and your mom would like to go on a picnic behind my farm. We can make it a kind of educational, said Tom Christie as he smiled at Annie. You see, behind my farm there used to be an old lumberjack camp. I like to go out there on the weekends and look around at all sorts of interesting things. Why, I found old buckets from the horse harness and a great looking metal chain hooked to a tree. Once I even found parts that looked like an old cook stove. Gus smiled up at his mother. Sounds great, Mom. Can we go? Annie smiled at her son. Well, sure, but you'll have to get better first, okay? Annie, why don't you let the boy get some rest so he can go home this morning? Would you like to have a cup of coffee with me in the dining hall? Asked Mr. Christie. We can talk about Gus's schoolwork. Annie McCarty smiled at Mr. Christie with a twinkle in her eye, and Mr. Christie smiled back with a grin so big his bushy mustache lay flat against his nose.